we could essentially, with a group of strangers, come together and through a series of theater games and rehearsals, become a really tight community engaged in the work of world building, of conjuring up an imaginary world on stage and discovering new possibilities within that. And the making requires time and requires presence and requires detail. And there's a whole conversation to be had here about the place of skill. That engaging in the arts is good for you. And, it's health behavior. So just like good nutrition, getting enough sleep, getting enough exercise, finding opportunities for creative expression is just good for you.
Welcome to the StageLink podcast, your access and connection to the live performing arts. In this podcast, you'll hear from some of the industry's most inspiring people from around the globe who create magic on stage and backstage. Our guests share their knowledge, passion, and the real stories of how a show comes together. We hope you enjoy this episode. Welcome to the StageLink podcast. My name is Anna Robb, and today we're talking with Dr. Nisha Sajnani. Nisha is a leading scholar, educator, and advocate in drama therapy and the arts in health. She is the director of the program in Drama Therapy and Theatre and Health Lab at NYU, founder of Arts and Health at NYU, and chair of the NYU Creative Arts Therapies Consortium. As co-director of the Jameel Arts and Health Lab, she established in collaboration with The WHO, she leads a global Lancet series on the health benefits of the arts. At NYU Abu Dhabi, Nisha developed Can Art Save Lives?, a transdisciplinary course linking arts, health, and policy. She's also a faculty advisor in NYU's Rehabilitation Sciences and Educational Theatre programs, co-teaching Improvisation and Leadership at NYU Stern. Additionally, she lectures on arts and displacement at the Harvard program in Refugee Trauma. An award-winning author, Nisha has co-authored and edited books on drama therapy, intercultural practice, and co-production in health. Her research has been published in the Lancet, Frontiers in Psychology, and the Arts in Psychotherapy, among others. She has co-produced films and exhibitions including Drama Therapy as Performance and Fostering Democracy Through Theatre. A founding member of the World Alliance of Drama Therapy, Nisha has received numerous awards, including the NADTA's Gertrude Schaffner Award and the APA's Global Women's Advocacy Awards. She holds a PhD from Concordia University and a certificate in climate change and health from Yale. Nisha, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's great. Look, your resume is so deep and wide, I don't even know where to start. But before we get into the questions about your career, I'll start with the most simple one. What were the stepping stones that led you to this particular avenue of the arts in your career?
I suppose it was a combination of passions inspired by artistic practice, but also personal stories. So exposure to the arts, for which I'm very grateful for. Exposure to dance, specifically to Bharatanatyam, classical Indian dance, to ballet, to jazz, to tap, to viola. I think my mother just wanted to ensure that we had as much exposure to the arts as possible to make up for the fact that she tells me there wasn't as much time for that in her growing up. And that led me ultimately to pursue theater in my undergraduate years. And I became really interested not only in what we were doing on stage, but what was happening backstage. That we could essentially, with a group of strangers, come together and through a series of theater games and rehearsals, become a really tight community engaged in the work of world building, of conjuring up an imaginary world on stage and discovering new possibilities within that. And I just couldn't let go of the psychological potential of that, the social potential of that, which is what led me to study drama therapy, applied theater and education, and so on. And it moved me down this path of looking at how we apply the lessons from the arts and the arts themselves towards greater human development and human health.
I love that. What can you sort of define for everybody what is drama therapy and what is the application of that?
So drama therapy is the intentional use of theater-based processes to facilitate therapeutic outcomes. So anything that we might think about as a building block of theater. So we might think about imagination or storytelling or role play or acting or the act of witnessing theater or witnessing somebody else engaged in an improvisation or a scene. All of these things could be considered what we might use in drama therapy, but for intentional therapeutic aims. So a drama therapist might work individually, one-on-one with someone, using some of these techniques to facilitate greater insight, or maybe the felt experience of what they've lived through in the past in order to look at new strategies in the present moment to deal with current conflicts. Or they might facilitate a group where, by virtue of engaging in improvisational theater games, there's a sense of well-being that's conjured in the group, a sense of confidence, and, also the possibility of delving into and tapping into the stories that the group wants to look at together. So I would say, drama therapists typically work in clinical contexts. They might work in a school counseling context. They might work in a hospital. They might support the health and well-being of healthcare staff. They're licensed in different parts of the world, just like you might find a licensed psychotherapist. Drama therapists can be licensed as creative arts therapists, or in some cases, they are licensed under different categories like counselors or psychotherapists. And in other parts of the world, they're not as well known. So folks might be more familiar with art therapy or music therapy, but drama therapy is part of a family of creative arts therapies, and some might be better known in some contexts than others.
Yeah, I definitely, my cousin has been a music therapist for a long time. So we definitely have heard of those ones. I think it's in this part of the world, definitely it's much less, although we do encourage a lot of drama groups and youth drama groups, which, as we all know, it's a great outlet for growing teens and things like that. When it comes to drama therapy, in terms of like the application, what sort of people most benefit? You said in hospitals, maybe I mentioned youth, but when these practitioners go out and do drama therapy, what groups are they sort of working in or with?
Right across the lifespan. So you might find drama therapists working in schools, as I mentioned, working with primary school age children, or with adolescents and adolescent treatment program, or in a community center, with adults who seek out drama therapists to work individually in private practice or in a group. And in rehabilitation centers or aged care centers, you might find drama therapists encouraging a sense of exploration, scene work and performances. I've worked with a center in New York, which is a naturally occurring retirement center, or NORC. And our students came together and worked with a group of adults there who are above the age of 80, and they wanted to put on a play, and they chose Fiddler on the Roof. And we put together a musical, which many of them had, they selected, but two, they had a real desire to perform and to play. And some of them spoke about the fact that it allowed them to become actors, and that at this point in their life, they didn't realize that they could fulfill that dream, right? That they would be able to explore these skills and present them in front of their friends and family, and to feel a sense of pride in that. So those are some examples. And some of the examples I'm mentioning are not clinical, in the sense that they don't involve people participating in drama therapy because there's something that they wish to address or a deficit that they wish to address, but rather because it's fun. It lifts mood. It promotes a sense of well-being and social connection. So drama therapy, I would say, is one example of how we can link the arts and health, to go back to your earlier question. But there are many examples that range from what we do in everyday life to what we do in our communities, to more intentional practices where we're engaging the arts to address specific issues.
I love that. Having said that, The Fiddler on the Roof was the very first show I ever saw in my life, Nisha. So I have a soft spot for that one. I think when I was about 11, and I must have said to my dad, I want to do that, not knowing what that was. But here I am, 25 years later, still doing it. You developed a course called Can Art Save Lives? So we've talked a little bit about the link between, doing drama therapy and being benefit for health, etc. So how does that now link to policies? What's the link there, and how does that guide or drive policy making?
So in that course, students are exposed to different kinds of practices. They get their hands into different practices. For example, they're exposed to kintsugi, which is the Japanese art of mending through gold. while they have an opportunity to engage in that craft, to learn the history about it, and to benefit from the analogies, to embracing our imperfections and being able to see the beauty even in the brokenness of life. And they also have an opportunity then to think about, given what engaging in a practice like this offers to us as a group, what kinds of opportunities exist in my city and in healthcare centers and in schools, for example, to allow more people to have access to opportunities like this. And that's where the policy piece comes in, because we can take a look at what provision is there in cultural centers and in healthcare centers, as well as in the context of education, for the arts to be available to people because of their known health benefits. Well, we could talk about the case for culture, the case for the arts from a variety of different angles, but I'm zooming into the health and well-being case for why we need to keep it protected and preserved within our schools and within our curricula, within healthcare, and as an option for people to participate in when they think about the path to wellness, and also how they might engage in activities that can support their own well-being, as well as, when just opportunities in everyday life. So when it comes to policies, we're looking at, in a city, are there opportunities for people across income brackets to behold the arts, to engage in it that way? Is there provision and funding available for community arts programs so people can get their hands in and experience it for themselves? And when they're seeking out care, is there provision for artists in healthcare centers or creative arts therapists as an option to wellness?
And is that a tough path to advocate for these policies in your world or with the people that you work with?
What I have found in the work that we've been doing over my time teaching that course, pulling together materials for that course, but also in some of the other work that I do through my research lab, that there are, in fact, some wonderful examples of policies all around the world where there is provision for an acknowledgement of the health and well-being benefits of creative expression and different artistic practices. So I would say that we tend to start from what does exist here, and let's build off of that. It's rare, actually, that there's no understanding or awareness of the relationships between the arts and health, because the human beings have been engaged in art making and mark making since the dawn of time. So there's an understanding that engaging in the arts is part of what makes us human. This is a human behavior. And if it's part of what we've been doing since the dawn of time, then we should also ask ourselves, what purpose is it serving? Do we need the arts to survive? Is it serving some evolutionary function? And if it offers us a chance to make meaning out of our lives, to experience a sense of purpose or belonging or joy or motivation, then we can understand engaging in the arts as a health behavior, that there is a health angle to it that we can lift up in the kinds of policies that we create to advance ourselves as species and in the context of a greater ecosystem and the small locus of our communities into our cities and at the country level and certainly across countries. And that's where the WHO comes in terms of being able to provide, for example, normative guidelines or normative policies around how we address dementia, for example. So if you think about guidelines around dementia care, is there an awareness of the benefits of music therapy? And if there isn't, we should be advocating for that, because there's excellent evidence in this area in terms of what it can offer. Exposure to music as well as music therapies.
Yeah. That's really interesting. I think that I've been in the industry for such a long time, but you take for granted some of the creative thinking and the things that the arts feed you as practitioners in the arts. And when you go into, say, the corporate world and you're like, oh my God, we do not think the same. And you come at problems a different way, and you can, it's an interesting collaboration is what, I guess what I'm saying, when you take yourself out of a little bubble of making arts and then going into what you're talking about, going into these other areas and applying those practices. So it's really interesting. You've also got co-teaching improvisation and leadership. So pivoting to that, is that, tell us about that. And is that kind of what I just spoke about? What is that course?
Yes, you've actually tapped into it already. Myself and my colleague David Purdy have developed and co-teach this course on leadership improvisation, and essentially looking at what does improvisation teach us about leadership? And improvisation, when people think about that, they might think about jazz improv, or they might think about the show Whose Line Is It Anyway, or some of these theatrical improv skit type shows. We don't teach improv per se in the course. What we are teaching is how the skills of improvisation not only help us to be funny. The point isn't necessarily to be funny. The point is to be free. The point is to be able to think on your feet and to be able to respond in the moment. But that really requires being in the moment and being in the conversation and not planning out what you're going to say too far in advance, but really staying in connection with the person that you're with or the group that you're with. And that can't lead you wrong, regardless of the business context in which you're in. If you're managing a small team to trying to hold attention in a boardroom, that paying attention to what impulses you're picking up on in the room and what matters to the people that you're speaking with will always make you more attuned, which will ultimately support your own leadership in that space. So students practice a wide variety of improv games. They have a lot of fun. They typically don't come from courses like that. They're typically students who are studying for an MBA. And this is a course that they risk taking because either they've had some exposure to improv and they thought it would be a lot of fun, or they're taking a risk and they're saying, let me try something new.
Stepping outside their comfort zone. I really love that.
Mm-hmm.
I was thinking about that the other day, just with the project that I'm working on and looking at what's quite unique about theatrical practices. You've got all of these skill sets that have come together to create a show, and they're all very different skill sets, from a stage manager to a lighting designer to a performer to a scenic designer, and all these people come in. And I was laughing the other day because I was watching the two designers on the stage be discussing about this pagoda and the little trim, and they're in their own world. And I was thinking a lot about the cadence. I'm going 1,000,000 miles an hour as a producer and I'm spinning my wheels, and here's these designers just in this slow creative process. And then there's the performer slowly building up, and we're all at a different cadence, but hopefully crossing the finish line all at the same time. But I was laughing just because it's, wow, managing those different cadences for everybody's skill set and bringing that together and then coordinating it together. It's such a unique environment, because in a corporate environment and in today's day and age, it's about productivity and speed and getting things across the line. And I think one of the things with arts is that some of the things that are best taken, especially in the creative field, need to take time to bake and take time to come together. And one of the things I often find myself in a producing context is trying to defend that creative time always, right? And you have to learn. I'd love to do that improvisation and leadership course, because you have to learn how to campaign for those things in those corporate environments. And now in the arts, with government funding going down and things like that, for you to get the funds to produce art, you've got to play in that space and you've got to get business savvy. And I think that one of the things that's really interesting is trying to find a way. I've been watching it for a while in tertiary institutions, like more business training, more marketing training, more ways that you can get your arts out there so that you can survive, because it's really competitive out there. Would you agree?
Yeah, you've spoken to this, just the many skills that artists need today in order to be able to advance in their work. And I would say that's true for teaching artists as well as arts educators and creative arts therapists, that this comes back to the conversation we were having about policy as well, because this has everything to do with, do the funding bodies that you appeal to recognize the value of the creative process? And can that be something that is also protected and funded and provided for in any project? Because it's where the magic happens. It's where two people can really commiserate around the value of what color is this pagoda going to be and where is its placement. And it sounds interesting and it's not going to solve climate change. However, it is an act of beauty that, when presented well, offers a sense of hope and cohesion and brings the story together. And it's those little details that an audience may not initially recognize. But I guess when we investigate this work further, when we investigate the components of what is contributing to the health and well-being benefits that we see in this work, it's both the beholding and it's the making, right? And the making requires time and requires presence and it requires detail. And there's a whole conversation to be had here about the place of skill in terms of some people spend a lot of time really developing a sense of fluency in the artistic craft that they're engaged with, right? And so when we talk about the arts and health, we're talking about everybody having access to creative expression, not only those who spend a lot of time honing their craft, but we can also talk about the place of skill in that when something is presented in a deeply skilled way, what does it evoke in a viewer? And is that different than, for example, making art because of the joy it gives us? I wouldn't place a higher value on either side of that continuum, but just to say that I acknowledge and value the fact there are different skills involved at different spaces along this continuum.
And I truly believe that if all of that has been done well on the creative side, the audience feel it. It may not be able to understand or contextualize it or know it's because they spent an extra 5 hours painting the pagoda that color. But when it comes together, there's that feel. And I've made shows very slow and I've made shows very fast and I've made corporate shows, and the level of impact, the direct consequences of the way you've put that together. And it's quite a fascinating thing to, and that's the danger also when you create art, you don't actually know until you put it in front of an audience. Has it been, did I do it right? Did we get it right? And that's always the risk in show making. So I want to move on because you also lecture on arts and displacement at the Harvard program in Refugee Trauma. Tell us a little bit about that, because that's an interesting avenue also for arts therapy, I guess.
Yeah, so I'm an alum of that program from 2010 and then was invited to teach on that course since. So it's been about 15 years of contributing to that program, examples of how the arts have been used to support people who are forcibly displaced, and also how people who are forcibly displaced have been sharing their stories through different art forms. So, of course, there are asylum seekers, refugees, and people who are otherwise displaced who are artists themselves and are using their art form as a platform to share their stories. But we can also take a look at how arts practices and arts therapies have been used to support spaces of storytelling, of grieving, of being able to collaborate with host communities in order to facilitate understanding and empathy and to present a sense of collaboration and coexistence to the wider community. I'll provide examples of this from around the world in that particular course. A few notable examples might be in Minneapolis, in the US, there is a band, a choir and a band that's made up of Sudanese refugees as well as host community members. And they just jam together. They just play together. And the act of playing together is analogous to what it is to live together, right? And so they're getting to know each other and experiencing each other as friends over time. And then being able to broadcast that or communicate that to an audience that picks up on not only the beauty of what they're playing, but also that they're playing together, which is, it's just communicating the fact that yes, we can in fact coexist and that we can be as a host community welcoming to people who for one reason or another found conditions so severe that they actually had to leave their place of familiarity in order to seek out safety elsewhere. And so what can we do to embrace people who are in that position? And when we make music together, we're communicating that it is in fact possible to make music together, to live together, right? And that we can in fact come into harmony. Another project is there's a Music International. It's another music example, although there are in fact many other visual arts examples as well. There's a project that we conducted with Yazda, which is an advocacy organization in northern Iraq that supports survivors from the Yazidi genocide, but also other communities that have lived through acts of violence and situations like genocide around the world. And so we worked with Yazda to provide a photography workshop and a painting workshop for formerly captured women who are living in a refugee camp in northern Iraq. And so over approximately 10 weeks, these women engaged in creating work that communicated some of what they were living and participated in a supportive group process where they could share stories about what they were experiencing, what they were aspiring and hoping for, now that they were on the other side of the violence, the direct violence, but also looking to remake a sense of home and a sense of identity. And then they shared examples of their photography and their painting on a cultural archive that we built together in partnership with Google Arts and Culture. And one can actually see this archive today. The Yazidi Cultural Archives are available online thanks to our partnership with Google. And you'll see their work and hear their stories in their own words, mostly speaking to the desire not to be forgotten and desire to keep their traditions alive and to ensure that their children and the next generation has a sense of what those traditions were and are. Because when we think about genocide, we're not only talking about the death of people, we're also talking about the destruction of intangible cultural heritage and that which gives people meaning and a sense of identity and purpose and belonging. And so this work was about celebrating the lives of these women, but also those acts of beauty that they engage in that communicate their identity.
That reminded me of, there was somebody sent me a sort of a case study of a project in Western Australia. It's not a refugee story, but also talking to the preservation of language and culture. They had performed, I can't remember the name of the play, but they'd performed a well-known play, but they'd in one of the very old Aboriginal languages, and they had to learn some of and it was in the effort to preserve some of that language, because a lot of those languages are never written down. And it was the study was just absolutely fantastic to see how many people participated in the community, not only to learn the dialogue and perform the dialogue, but also come and watch that experience for the Aboriginal community. Super amazing to preserve that, I think.
I know in Australia, the Refugee Art Project has been a tremendous project. It's another example that I draw on. And it's, it was a project that brought together asylum seekers, refugees living within Australia who were waiting detention centers, and essentially creating artwork with these communities as they were waiting, and then showcasing them to a broader Australian public to facilitate those acts of understanding and listening, and also celebrating the artists within those displaced communities for their work in their own right. So a lot of these examples we pulled together, and coming back to the question you were asking around policy, we put them together, a policy brief that presents the evidence for how do these kinds of projects make a difference psychologically and socially, and when it comes to physical health of both refugee communities as well as host communities, and what can be done about it. So what kinds of policy recommendations might follow from what we're finding in terms of the evidence base for the impact of this kind of work.
Well, that's amazing. Speaking on psychology, you've also helped write books about the psychology and arts in psychology. So tell us a little bit about maybe your involvement in those and how important that may be, I guess.
I suppose this is getting at how do the arts impact us psychologically? How do the arts impact us physically and socially? And when we come back to, for example, the art of improvisation or the art of theater making, what we're inviting people to do is engage in a kind of cognitive flexibility. It takes a kind of flexibility internally in order to shift from one activity to another activity, the way that you might in a theater game, or to step into one role and then to shift into another role. It requires the ability not only to be flexible, but to adapt to the given circumstances of a new scene. It requires the ability to focus and to concentrate on what one is communicating, which requires a certain amount of internal organization in order to organize what one wants to say and to be able to read the room and to do that in the context that one is in. So there are a lot of psychological responses that are prompted through the art making, in this case, theater making, that we might engage in, that are being worked at as well. Certainly physically, we could say when we think about dance, for example, dance is, of course, for those who enjoy it anyway, it's an enjoyable recreational activity. But if we think about it, it's also, of course, engaging us physically, right? And it's often engaging us socially at the same time. We're attending to social interaction, which we know is so vital for our health and well-being. The WHO had spoken to a crisis of social connection or a crisis of social isolation, with more and more people feeling cut off or disconnected from others. certainly as we get older, but also as a result of illness or for any number of reasons. Certainly the pandemic certainly exacerbated this. But when we think about loneliness, creates the conditions for a wide variety of different kinds of illnesses, for greater anxiety, for greater depression. So sometimes or not sometimes, but we can also look at engaging in the arts like dance, art making together as a way of not only supporting our psychological health, but supporting our physical health as we engage in movement together, and supporting our social health because we are, engaged in creative work together. So the arts are engaging us on multiple levels at the same time.
Mm. And how do you think that, because I'm raising teens in this digital world, how do you open that and get people motivated to participate in those programs or drama and things like that? Because I think it is a harder battle these days with the easy, addictive digital components that allow people. And that is part of the cause of that isolation, right? So if they're just digitally connecting with friends, which is how a lot of people do these days, instead of in person. Like I have to say, like, my children will invite friends around and they'll be hanging out together, but they'll play digital games together, right? So they're not like climbing trees, or it's a very different world these days. Is there any advice on getting that more effort and attention and desire? I think it's really about the desire to go and do those things. My son regularly goes to a theatre class, and it's one of the only things that I know that he'll always get up and go on a Saturday morning because that's what he does. But how do you encourage other people to desire those connections when it's so easy to stay at home on a phone?
You're absolutely right. I'm guilty of this myself. And part of this comes back to a kind of public health or public awareness campaign. If we think about how we got large groups of people to brush their teeth, not once a month, but every day, how we have encouraged a certain awareness of the importance of putting on seatbelts. There's a public health component to this as well, because the science is telling us that engaging in the arts, whether as a beholder or a maker, even once a month, can extend your life by up to 10 years, right?
Wow.
That doing 20 minutes of art just once a month, just something as simple as doodling, or something as simple as going to an exhibit, taking in an art show, or participating in an art class, can extend our lifespan. That if we have a greater understanding of this, that we might actually permit ourselves to do more of it. It's a bit like developing an awareness of good exercise. Going for a walk is good for you. And for the most part, most of us agree that going for a walk is a good idea and that we ought to do it once a week, twice a week, 3 times a week, that we should try to get as much exposure to nature, but also physical exercise as possible. And we're trying to think about the arts in the same way, that engaging in the arts is good for you. And, it's health behavior. So just like good nutrition, getting enough sleep, getting enough exercise, finding opportunities for creative expression is just good for you. You need to do more of it, bring more of it into our lives. It's not going to be for everyone, right? So you might enjoy a dance class and you might enjoy collage making. Your son might enjoy a theater class and somebody else might like taking in beauty in a different way. And that's perfectly fine. I think to each their own in terms of the kinds of art forms that they're drawn to. But it is part of what makes us human, and we ought to find ways of exercising that muscle of creative expression.
We need to keep advocating for it to be an essential part of everybody's lives.
Yes.
Yeah. We always finish our podcast, Nisha, with the same 2 questions, so I'm going to ask them now. Tell us about your most favorite thing about your job or the industry.
One of my favorite things about this job, and likely the most favorite thing, is that I get to meet so many different people who are passionate about this work and they understand it deeply. They've often been at it for a long time. They often have felt unrecognized and not valued for the work that they're doing as art teachers, as arts practitioners, as arts facilitators, as arts therapists, and hearing the stories of what they've been doing, as well as the stories of people who have discovered a new passion for life and have found a sense of purpose because of their own involvement in creative work. That's probably my favorite part of the job.
Mm. And if you could change one thing about your job or the industry, what would that be?
I'd make it a lot easier for us to find the funding to do what we do, to continue to and advocate for those benefits. I guess success in our line of work would actually be to put ourselves out of a job, because this would be so well known and so well supported that there wouldn't be need.
Amazing answer. Nisha, thank you so much for joining us on the StageLink podcast. It's such a pleasure to explore all the avenues that you work in, and I wish you the best.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to the StageLink podcast. StageLink is an online platform that gives you access and connection to the live performing arts. As a guest, you can read about live performing arts from across the globe and gain insights from performers and artists on stage and all the amazing people who work behind the curtain. If you are an industry professional, StageLink Pro offers jobs, networks, and career support tools, and you can build your own professional profile on the site. As a StageLink podcast listener, you are eligible for 20% off your StageLink Pro membership. Visit us at stagelink.com, and when joining, use the code SLPodcast. StageLink, that's StagelYnc.com.